Good evening and welcome to the July 13th, 2021 regular meeting of the City of Troy Planning Commission. Copies of the agenda for tonight's meeting are available at the entrance to the room. Agendas and minutes of prior meetings are available on the city website. The meeting will be conducted in accordance with the agenda as presented or amended by the Planning Commission. State law establishes planning commissions. The Planning Commission is comprised of 9 residents appointed to serve our community. Members are appointed by the mayor and confirmed by City Council. Other individuals participating in the meeting include representatives from the city's planning department, city attorney's office, and the city's planning consultant, Carlisle Wortman Associates. If you wish to address the Planning Commission, please come forward to the lectern when recognized and provide your name and address on the sign-in sheet. Please begin your remarks by stating your name and address for the benefit of the commissioners. All remarks are to be addressed to the Planning Commission, not to anyone else in the room. If you have a cell phone or any other device that might disrupt the meeting, please either switch it to silent mode or turn it off. At this time, I'd like the Planning Commission Secretary to conduct the roll call.
Mr. Faison?
Here.
Mr. Hudson?
Here.
Mr. Krent?
Here.
Mr. Lambert?
Here.
Ms. Malala Holly?
Here.
Ms. Parakis?
Here.
Mr. Rahman?
Here.
Mr. Roush?
Here.
Mr. Tagle?
Here.
We have a quorum. Next item is extension of the Planning Commission bylaws. We've read that in. Do we have to continue with that or not? Are we clear by the state to avoid?
Well, that's up to Planning Commission. If you want to allow email and voice participation, you need to extend your bylaws.
Do we have that ability right now or not?
Yes, that's independent of the state requirements. It's something
Okay.
you can do as a Planning Commission.
Okay.
If you don't want to, I mean, if you don't have to.
What's consensus here? Do we want to extend?
Let's just continue and extend.
Okay, we'll continue and extend. Do we have a motion to extend our commission bylaws to include comments from email and phone calls and messages?
I will so move.
Mr. Hudson, second. Mr. Lambert. Okay, roll call, please.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Ms. Malala Holly?
Yes.
Ms. Parakis?
Yes.
Mr. Rahman?
Yes.
Mr. Roush?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next item is approval of tonight's agenda. Do we have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
I'll move.
Go ahead, Mr. Faison.
Yes.
Second, Mr. Tagle. Roll call, please.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Ms. Malala Holly?
Yes.
Ms. Parakis?
Yes.
Mr. Rahman?
Yes.
Mr. Roush?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next item is approval of the minutes from our June 22nd, 2021 meeting. Motion, please. Mr. Lambert, seconded by Mr. Roush. Roll call, please.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Ms. Malala Holly?
Yes.
Ms. Parakis?
Yes.
Mr. Rahman?
Yes.
Mr. Roush?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Next item on our agenda tonight is public comment for items that are not on tonight's agenda. Do we have anyone here or yes? Please step forward and give your name and address.
Good evening.
Howdy.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Good evening, board members. My name is Ali Apahidian, and I'm a resident of Troy. And sorry, I'm out of breath. I just ran up here. I didn't want to miss the public comment. I just wanted to bring before you tonight an item that is not on this agenda, and I don't think it ever was on the agenda. It's probably never, ever going to be on the agenda. And it's actually one of these circumstances where there's a project that is going to be built in Troy that will never come before you and will never come before the city council. And that's because of a very unique situation that rarely happens. And that's because it's being built on Troy School property. And anything that's being built on Troy School property is actually exempt from the zoning ordinance, and it never comes before you, and it never comes before the city council. And during the board meeting last month on June 15th, I believe, the board actually approved the construction of a cell phone tower on the property of Bolin Park Middle School. There was never, ever any public engagement. The parents of over 800 kids that go to that school were never notified. Teachers are not notified. The neighbors that are in that neighborhood were never notified. And so here's a project that actually will never come before you, and it never requires any kind of public engagement. The board never involved the public the way this board always involved public engagement. You've had projects in the past that were very contentious, like neighborhood nodes, where it affects 30, 40, 50 neighbors that are very local. But here's a project that is going to be built on school property that affects at least 800 families in the city, and it never will come before you. And so my question is, how or will we ever change that process where at least parents get informed, at least the teachers that go to this school get informed? I understand it's a controversial topic of whether a cell phone, it's the company's AT&T. They're actually paying the school $36,000 a year, so the school is benefiting financially. There's some interest there, but this is debatable. There is research out there, there's scientific information out there that actually shows that cell phone towers are not healthy. Some believe they are, some believe they're safe, some believe they're not. But that still is up for debate at this point. I just looked up a few studies. There's a study out in Germany that showed that 1,000 people were studied over a course of 10 years, and it showed that there was a threefold increase in cancer in those that lived within a quarter mile of that cell phone tower. There's a school out in California just recently, a couple of years ago, that actually had a cell phone tower put on there by Sprint on school property, and they demanded that it be actually closed down because 4 students and 3 teachers got cancer. Now, that was enough for them to actually request that. So here we have a situation in our own backyard where we have the same situation where even 2 school board members actually opposed it. They voted against it, including the board president. I think it's worthy of discussion that we have such projects that come in our city, that if this project would have been built 25 feet away over the property line of the school, it would have been under completely different requirements that any developer comes before us, before you, and before City Council. It would require a special use permit, and it would be a totally different project. But here we have a project that is under the radar. Parents don't know about it. Students were never questioned, no public engagement. So I just wanted to bring that before you tonight. Just as a thought, just for discussion at some future time, that we have such projects in our city that are contentious and have absolutely no public engagement. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Abahidian. Any other people, anyone else in the audience would like to make public comment at our meeting? Seeing none, I'll close the
Mr.
public.
Kren, I think we have an email.
Oh, okay.
Did
Did you get it? Oh,
Oh,
everyone have it or no?
different. That's for later.
Okay, so it's not, but is it for a comment, not on an item?
No, I emailed you something that was in my inbox that was related to what Mr. Apahidian was saying at the podium. I can share it if you'd like.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's funny,
Sure.
it's timing. It was, I had a email dialogue with Assistant City Attorney Motsney. I actually was asking about exemptions of public schools. And I was asking about this type of situation. This is from almost a month ago. And Mr. Motsney forwarded me a case, Charter Township of Bloomfield versus Birmingham Public Schools, where that case held that since a communication tower on school property was not used for school purposes, they were not exempt from the township zoning provisions. So I shared that with Julie, but she doesn't have access to her email right now, so she was unprepared for this comment. So we can look at this further. Mr. Abahidian sent me an email, full disclosure, sent me an email today asking about exemptions, and I think perhaps my response wasn't clear, that school facilities on school property are exempt. private facilities on school property are not exempt.
Good to hear. That's
So
important.
we can, but I don't want to steal Julie's thunder. I'm not an attorney, but I just happen to have the email that Alan sent me, and she doesn't. So she's in a,
Well, you've forwarded it to me in a text. I note that it's an unpublished opinion from 2003. It's from the Court of Appeals. So I would have to speak with
Yeah.
Mr. Matsny regarding precedential value.
so now we're aware, so we can research this.
Yeah, I'd appreciate if you did. I know when cell tower was proposed at Bolin Park, right near Bolin Middle School, it was soundly defeated by city council at the time because of a lot of reasons, but one was aesthetics and one was, again, the various frequencies, radio waves, whatever they put out, was concerned for the neighbors that were within a few thousand feet or less. So thank you for following up on that, and please report back to us on that. I'm very interested to find out what the legal ramifications are.
Yeah, from this point forward, I defer 100% to Julie on this matter.
Very good. Thank you.
Some heads up would have been nice.
Any other comments that are not on the agenda from our audience? Seeing none, we'll go on to the next item. Preliminary site plan review, file number PSCP 2021-0001, proposed Willowbrook number 2 site condominium. The personal identification, is that a property identification number, not a personal one, is 88-20-24-100-013 and 88-20-24-100-014, 7 units per lot, per lots. East side of John R., south of Waddles, section 24, currently zoned R1C, one family residential zoning district. Mr. Carlisle's going to take it? Great.
Yes, thank you. Good evening. Mr. Faison reminded us today that this item may seem somewhat familiar because it was actually in your packet at a meeting, I believe in May, and we pulled it based on some direction from the applicant. So you have seen our report, you've seen our review in previous applications, but again, this is the first time it's being considered by this body in a meeting. The applicant is proposing to develop this approximately 3-acre site located on the east side of John R., just south of Waddles. It's a second phase of the Estates of Willowbrook. The first phase was approved by the Planning Commission a few years ago. The site is zoned R1C, single-family residential. Please note, it's the north arrow is actually pointing to the right here, so I flipped it just to be readable. The applicant on these 3 acres is proposing a development of 7-unit site condominium. These are really detached single-family homes. The proposed residential use is a permitted use in the R1C district. All lots will have access off a new 60-foot wide public road, which is an extension of McCaw and Sandpiper drives. And these would connect 2 public roads. And again, the proposed site condominium meets all the requirements of the R1C district. We do note that in the corner, if you see the screen at the top, there was a portion of what is now being deemed as Lot 5 that was reserved as part of the Phase 1 to be converted to a future lot as part of Phase 2. So what they've done for that lot is combined it with the part that was held over from Phase 1 to create one single lot. That's lot number 5 in this development. In addition, we note, if you again look at the screen here at the front, there's a large outlot here. It's approximately 46 feet by 409 feet. That the applicant's also deeming as a potential future development if they're able to acquire property just to the south. We do note that if this is approved and moves forward, that they would add language to the master deed that the developer will maintain this outlot until such time as the outlot is turned over to the association or the developer then ceases any right to develop that. What we don't want is the burden of that being maintained on the homeowner association without some developer responsibility with this moving forward. The applicant has submitted a landscape plan. It does comply with the landscape requirements for a site condominium, and it does include a mixture of evergreen and deciduous trees. The applicant has provided sidewalks along both sides of the street. We do note that there is a proposed crossing, mid-block crossing, kind of near where the outlot is. We just ask that it be striped. There's no striping indicated across the road, so we indicate that that be striped. The applicant has submitted sample floor plans and elevations. There's 3 different elevations for these 7 homes. One does include a ranch. This is the ranch model. This is a slightly larger colonial model. And then the largest colonial model. We do note that it does meet all of the submittal requirements for a site condominium project. And we are recommending approval, provided that the applicant provide crosswalk striping, and again, they add that language to the master deed regarding that future outlot development. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any comments for our planning director or planning consultant regarding this project? Seeing none, we'll ask the developer to come up and add comments he'd like to make.
Good evening. It's all good to see everybody in person again. It's been a little while since I've been here. Thank you for the opportunity to present this. It's pretty straightforward connection of the 2 streets.
One thing, Joe.
What's that?
Your name.
Oh, Joe Maniaci. I'll even write it down. See, I forgot how to do this. It's a continuation of one of our subdivisions, and we're just trying to fill in. We pulled it off, hoping to get the last piece on John R. to make the whole complete loop, but at this time, they're not willing to sell, so we're going to hold on until, we'll go through with what we have now and work on the rest later. Any other questions for me?
Go ahead, Mr. Hudson.
Mr. Mediaci, you've got 7 units there, and you've got 3 different styles showing. Are you going to build those, or are you going to wait for a buyer to come in and tell him which one of those models they would like?
We're not going to build it. We won't pre-build them at this time.
Okay.
We wait for the sale, and the homeowner gets to pick the house and elevations. We show 3 elevations or 4 elevations per home. So by city ordinance, we're not allowed to put the same elevation on adjoining properties. So we have flexibility in that aspect.
Well,
And
is it
home style.
because you have a ranch style in there, and that seems to be what we like to see. Necessarily, the market doesn't support our view, but the opportunity is there for someone to do that.
Correct.
Mr. Hudson asked my question.
Okay.
Exactly same question.
Ms. Barakas.
Yeah, I was wondering a couple of questions about the status of that southern lot. So if you were able to obtain it, it would be usable for your purposes? Is that my understanding?
Correct.
Has there been any consideration to take those lots? We don't have the picture up. I don't know how easy it is for you to put the picture up of the renderings where the houses, so you could see it. Because what about taking like lots or houses 3 and 4 and twisting them to be fronting on that Chickadee Drive so you can bring the road down and actually make room to complete it without that lot? Did you consider that? Is that even possible?
The lots are only 103 feet deep to conform with the other side of the subdivision. So the houses are more wider than deeper. So it doesn't conform to rotate it. The house isn't deep enough, or the lot's not deep enough in the other direction to put the house facing southward.
I see.
So any extension to the future homes would all be facing northerly on Chickadee Drive.
Right. So they'd be facing the sides of those 2 homes?
Yes.
Okay.
Ms. Malala Holly, do you have a comment?
Yeah, thank you. I drove by the area yesterday, and am I correct, there is an Osprey Drive that gets you into McCaw and Sandpiper Drives? Correct, okay. So this outlot, and by the way, the homes there are beautiful. I drove by, it was absolutely nice and very well maintained. The outlot, based on your experience, what normally happens with an outlot area? I know that that is something that you will be maintaining probably till an arrangement is done, but is that an area where we can think about some kind of play structure, some playscape area
Currently, we'll
families?
put it in our inventory for future development. So we'll just continually maintaining it as is. Would the neighborhood have access to it? We've never denied any neighborhoods if they want to do gatherings on it. Mostly it's scrub brush and wooded trees,
Yeah.
so it's not developed or manicured. We leave it in its natural state until future development.
And when you say future development, I take it any more homes in that area, if
Yeah.
possible?
If it does not, I believe we have 5 years under the master deed to do something with it, and at that time, if we do not do anything with it, then it will revert to the homeowners association and be part of a park, an open space park for the homeowners.
Okay, got it. Thank you, appreciate it.
Go ahead, Mr. Lambert.
When you work on a development like this and you're kind of adding it in phases and there's already an existing homeowners association, do the new lots get added into that existing homeowners association, or do they kind of get created as separate entities?
According to my attorney, by law, they are separate subdivisions.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Anyone else for our developer? Thank you for seeing them.
Have a good night, everyone.
Yep, thank you. Okay, at this time, anyone would like to move a resolution?
I'll move.
Go ahead, Mr. Faison.
Just give me a second. Resolved that preliminary site condominium approval pursuant to Article 8 and Section 10.02 of the zoning ordinance as requested for Willowbrook Number 2 site condominium 7 unit slots east side of John R., south of Waddles, PIN 88-20-1000-013 and 88-20-24-100-014, Section 24, currently zoned R1C, one-family residential district, be granted, subject to the following. Provide crosswalk striping. 1, provide crosswalk striping. 2, add language to the master deed stating that the developer will maintain the outlot until such time that the outlot is turned over to the association or the developer's rights cease to exist.
You have a second. Go ahead, Mr. Rahman. Vote, please.
Ms. Malala Holly,
Yes.
Ms. Parakis,
Yes.
Mr. Rahman,
Yes.
Mr. Roush,
Yes.
Mr. Tagle,
Yes.
Mr. Faison,
Yes.
Mr. Hudson,
Yes.
Mr. Krant,
Yes.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. You're welcome. Next item on our agenda tonight is the master plan update.
You want to start off with the
I'll start off. Yeah, I'll introduce this and then pass it on to Mr. Carlisle. I think Ben will get into the details, but I think we had a really successful master plan survey effort initiated on May 27th with a full-page ad in the Troy Times, which is delivered to every household in the city. That kickstarted us very well, but we also wanted to exceed the number 1,500 that was kind of laid down by the Planning Commission, and we really wanted to make our best foot forward in terms of effort for getting the word out. So just to highlight some of the efforts, we posted numerous times the flyer with the QR code and the link on it on the city's Facebook page, which has about 9,000 followers. Twitter has over 4,000 followers. We put the link on the front page of the city website, so when anyone went to the city website, boom, there was an article and a link to the survey that people could click on and fill out. We sent an email blast to GovDelivery, which is over 10,000 subscribers. Sent the email blast to 30 places of worship, 55 Troy HOAs for them to share with their parishioners and their residents respectively. We sent a link to the board of directors for the Boys and Girls Club, a historic society of Troy. We sent a link to all members of Global Troy. The mayor and numerous city council members shared the survey link on their social media platforms. We sent a press release to all media outlets in the area, and we distributed flyers with the QR code and a link on it all throughout the city, grocery stores, coffee shops, things like that. Also recognizing that there are people that don't have smartphones and they don't have computers. So we put hard copies at the community center for people to fill out hard copies. And I'm glad we did, because we had 35 responses through hard copies. So we tried to really put our best foot forward, as I said. And the result is we got 1,653 responses. So we exceeded the challenge of 1,500. And with that, I'm very happy about that. And with that, I'll pass it off to Ben to kind of sharpen the focus and get a little more into the details.
Thank you. So tonight, there's really two. I want to break down the survey results kind of in two forms. First is the overall, and then talk about specifically about the nodes. I want to be clear. This is a higher level summary than what was provided in your packet. So there's nothing new that I'm going to present to you tonight that's was not included in your packet. And so really the point of tonight is more for your feedback and discussion about the results of the survey, rather than me presenting anything new to you. So overall, as Director Savenant noted, we had approximately 1,600 respondents. Of that, 98% of them were Troy residents. This answer also allowed you to click multiple times based on your relationship with the city. And so 49% shop in Troy, 23 work in Troy, 22 have a student in the Troy high school or student in the Troy school district, and lastly 2 were the other. 2 were, I assume, are the other that necessarily don't live in Troy. Typical with your geography in terms of population, 36% of the responders were located in the northeast corridor or east quadrant, northeast, and 31% were located. I'm dyslexic with directions, but I got this one right. And 31% were in the northwest quadrant. One of the questions was, what do you like best about Troy? There were options to click 5 responses, but there were 4 that kind of were heads above the other ones. First is the schools, neighborhoods, location, and public safety. And then the rest were kind of a little bit lower and included a multitude of different options. One of the questions that the Planning Commission wanted us to ask and was important was, does Troy have enough open space? 47% said yes, but more is always welcome. 39% flatly said no, and 13% said yes without the option or without the expression that we needed more open space. Found this question very interesting, is what kind of new residential development is missing in Troy? 46% said empty nester, to your point, Mr. Hudson, about how we talk a lot about ranches and houses with first floor masters, et cetera. 46% of the respondents desired that. 30% of the people said none. There's simply no need for new residential development in Troy. And then again, going down the list, some of the other types of housing were less than that. I'll note that townhomes and apartments, so what we consider multifamily, were scored very, very low, 6% and 5% respectively. What kind of non-residential development in Troy was missing? The highest one, 41%, was none. So no additional non-residential development in Troy. The next 2 highest ones were entertainment and recreational. And that's not unusual. We've heard that a lot from residents, and that goes back many years about how there's more desire to have more recreational uses, entertainment uses. And then again, kind of another mix going down the road of different other types of uses. Far and away, the top priority in this master plan to focus on was parks and open space. Now, a master plan typically doesn't get into the issue of parks per se. You have a separate parks and recreation plan. Doesn't mean we can't cross-reference and kind of include some of those recommendations in this, but typically it's not a focus of a master plan. Open space preservation could be something that we would include and discuss as part of this master plan process. The other popular answers were natural environment, neighborhood, public safety, schools, and walkability. Very little bit of focus on commercial shopping areas, development, and I think that's reflective in the answers I just gave about what types of new development do we need. So that's a very high level. There are more detailed questions in there that were included in your thing. I didn't feel like we need to get in that tonight per se, but we also spent a lot of time in the survey focusing on the nodes, so I'm going to go over that real quickly. We asked respondents to the survey to respond to up to, there were 19 no's, and they could respond to 3 that they were found most important, or most that they want to put input into. There were 6 no's that were far and above the highest respondents, and these included 4 on Waddles and 2 on Long Lake. So the highest responded by far was Crooks and Waddles. And then the other 5 kind of were highly responded, but not nearly as much as Crooks and Waddles. So the other ones were Waddles and Rochester, Long Lake and Livernois, Waddles and John R., Long Lake and Rochester, and Waddles and Livernois. This is a very messy graph to put on a slide, but it was included in your packet. I think what's interesting is when you go down the 6 most interested nodes, for the most part, people feel that either it's been developed too intense or just right. Those were always the top 2 answers for these 6 nodes. There were 4, I believe, that were noted. Let me see, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, no, there were 3 that were just right, and there were 3 that were too intense with regards to the most common answer, and flip-flop with the second answer. What I found to be very interesting, though, was the second question there, and what type of development fits this node. 5 of the 6, the highest answer was single family, and I'll talk about that in a second, what that means. The second highest desire was mixed use. So there is a desire for mixed use if these nodes, when and if these nodes get developed. And not surprisingly, people found why it was important was they live nearby. So they've got a very vested interest into these individual nodes. So I'm going to go through each node. And what I thought was interesting was I really focused on the question about, was it too intense or is it just right? And also, what's the future use? So what I wanted to do was look at each node in its current state in terms of what's happened, what's the future of that node, what's been the history of that node, really specifically since the master plan has been updated with this concept of the nodes, specifically in 2008 and 2011 with the update in the zoning ordinance. What's surprising is Crooks and Waddles has had the most, I would say, development pressure of all the 6 nodes I know. There's been 3 that have been approved, 2 have been built, and a 4th that has been before this commission and ultimately was denied. And this node really is the only node that really has been what I would deem as not developed or has been developed mostly as single family, kind of in the 3 of the 4 surrounding corners. When you look at some of the other nodes that drew the most interest, Waddles and Rochester, for example, there really hasn't been much development in the recent history. In this development, there's been one, the Town Haven Park. It has been submitted but not improved, and it's not part of the node. It doesn't have the node zoning. Long Lake and Livernois. Long Lake Square, it was not part of the original node in 2011. It was added via conditional rezoning. I think that was, what, in 2016-ish?
Around there, yeah.
So approximately 5 years after the zoning was in place, it was added to the node. So it wasn't part of the original node. So nothing has developed in this node that wasn't part of the original concept. Waddles and John R., there's been no recent development as part of the nodes on Waddles and John R. Long Lake Square, there's been 2. One I would say is minor. The Flag Star Bank put an exterior renovation, so more just facade improvement. And then there was the Midtown Cluster. Again, wasn't part of the node, but it was in the general vicinity of that node. So again, other than the Flag Star, there's been no development within Long Lake and Rochester node.
Can I ask a question, Mr. Carlisle?
Sure.
you refer to Midtown cluster of townhomes that sits right behind Flagstar Bank and that strip mall that is there? Are you referring to that townhome complex?
It's located just north on Rochester. Is that the one? Is that what you're referring to?
So you have Flagstar Bank, and I'm just envisioning the whole thing. And then you have Patel Brothers, the Indian grocery store, all of those other stores. And then after that, there was Boston Market in the corner. And then after that, the new development that's coming up, they're still building homes.
It's right. Yeah. So it's hard to see. So the Flagstar Bank is here. I'm outlining it.
Okay, I see it. Yeah.
And then
that's exactly
Midtown Square is that right there. Yep.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So that was not part of the original cluster. It's not in the it's not. I'm sorry, original node. It's not zone node right now, but we won't include it to show it. That's in the general vicinity of a node.
So to that end, was the survey, not having it in front of me and not remembering it, was the survey clear enough that the person that would have been answering the question would know whether that was part of the node or not part of the node?
We showed a map of all the nodes with the kind of what the zoning was. Probably to the layman, they may not know that that was not part of the node.
And when you kind of evaluate it, is that the perspective that you look at it, you might consider that they consider?
I include this because to your point, I would think that the common person would probably throw that in as part of a node development. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a layman's question, because when I was answering the survey, this thing came up in my mind. When we talk about node, what is the radius that we are talking about? 0.5 miles, 0.2 miles? What's the radius that we normally refer to that in layman terms people would be able to effectively answer the survey question?
So there's two answers to that. So in the master plan, when the nodes were developed, it was, like I said, it's the corner of major mile intersections. And really what it did is simply drew about a quarter to half mile circle around each node. And that identified the node concept on the master plan. When you actually get into the specific zoning, we actually identified parcel by parcel what was zone node through the form-based district. And it included anywhere from one parcel at a corner to up to 3 parcels on either side of a corner parcel. So it varies node by node.
Okay, got it.
Can I
Thank
ask
you.
Go ahead, you done?
No, I'm done.
One more interpretation question. So when you were looking at the a couple back, when you were talking about the responses that you got, and the people said just right or too intense, did you look at it from the perspective of if they said just right or too intense, of what they were seeing there then or what had actually been approved at that time? Because you mentioned like at Waddles and Crooks as an example, the at least one item had been approved prior to the master plan survey going out, but it had not been developed yet, isn't it? Jen, was I clear with my question?
Yeah, I'm not sure we got that in depth in our analysis of the survey results at this point. I think let me get through this and then we can kind of circle back to some of these points.
Thanks.
And lastly, Waddles in Livernois, we've won development. Langview, it's been submitted but not approved at this point. To your point, and we can dive deeper, and we can have the Planning Commission can ask us to dive deeper in terms of some of this, is really other than Crooks and Waddle, all the nodes for the most part have been built out prior even to 2008. The date's wrong there. What, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I would just piggyback on that. So the node concept, contrary to some of the narrative that bounces around out there in the public, this isn't something that like Ben and I came up with, this notion of nodes. I'm going to put the blame squarely on the shoulders of Mr. Lambert, who I joke, but Dave was on City Council, I believe, at the time when we did the visioning effort, which was a very well attended. A lot of residents were involved in this visioning exercise, and one of the things they wanted to see was more neighborhood, more destination type walkability type areas located at intersections. So it came through that visioning exercise, and we took that, and the direction was very clear from the residents that carry over into the master plan. So that's where the notion kind of came from, and we recognize that there were some nodes like some of the ones that Mr. Carlisle mentioned that were built out, but the form wasn't what we wanted, because the form of a lot of these nodes was the commercial building was set back with parking in front, and it really wasn't. It didn't relate to the street. It wasn't inviting from the standpoint of walkability, and there was potential for infilling some of this. So even though they're built out from the perspective of buildings and parking lots, there was still potential to do better. So that one of the intents of the node when we created it was to have reinvestment. So we assume that everything has a life, including some of these strip centers, and over time they would be replaced with something better and better measured by how, walkability and sense of place and character and things like that. So I just want to make that clear.
Yeah, and I think, Ms. Roush, your question, I can't get into the mind of how someone answered the question in terms of what they're taking in with consideration. I think, though, what I'm trying to show here is that perception and reality might not be matching up right now. And a lot of people think that any development in Troy recently is in a node, and that simply is not true. There are some that are near nodes, and there's some that are in the nodes, but a lot of development's not even close to a node, yet it gets lumped in with the concept of a node. And so you have a lot of people that answered it's too intense, or it's just right, and that was without any new construction for the most part in a lot of these nodes over the last 10 years. And so I found that very interesting. And then to that point, and even furthermore, is other than Crooks and Waddle, there's no node that would be characterized as single-family residential in terms of what we consider as a node, development at the hard corner. And so the desire to go back to single-family or have these nodes be single-family is something that we should really, it's really a thought that we should think about whether or not that's the direction that this commission really wants to go in.
So when you say single family, you're talking about detached single family?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, fourth conclusion is other than single family residential, there's a strong desire, I would say strong desire is questionable. There is a desire for mixed use over any other type of use other than single family residential, because mixed use scored first or second in all 6 of those nodes for desire. And lastly, there was little to no desire for multifamily. The highest node that scored multifamily was 9%, and that was at Waddles and Rochester and Long Lake and Livernois. And so, I sat on these results for a couple of days just thinking about what did it mean. You have so many people responding that's too intense or just right, yet nothing's changed. In a lot of respects, not much has happened in a lot of these. So is it a few developments or a few nodes that have kind of changed the perception of people? Or is it something deeper? And I don't think we have an answer to that, but I think we want to make sure that there's a strong educational component as part of this process to really get down to what we're talking about when we mean nodes, what we mean the future development. And I think I want to have some discussion with the Planning Commission, what your thoughts are, but I think what Brent and I hope to get out of it tonight is we realize that we can't focus on all 19 nodes, and that would be not a good use of time and resources. Like I noted, there are 6 nodes that really scored the highest in terms of people's concerns or interest. So we were hoping that you would say, yeah, these are the 6 nodes we want you to focus on, and that's where we would start the engagement process with the neighbors on these 6 nodes. So I think that's kind of what we're looking for discussion and some direction on. And Director Salvon, I don't know if you had anything to add to that.
I would say that one of the surprises of the survey was there's a development located on Livernois just south of Square Lake Road on the west side, and it's a 43-unit development that's in a node, and it's one of the developments that people tend to be the most critical about, and I expected that one to be a popular node that was referred to in the survey, and it was not. It did not make the top 6, which surprised me. But yeah, I think if we could leave tonight's meeting with the beginning of a game plan in terms of which nodes to focus on, like Ben said, he's suggesting that we focus on the 6 that are identified in the survey. But if you think that the survey is off the mark and you want us to go in a different direction, we're here to listen.
Go ahead, Mr. Faison.
Just a question on the conclusions, the third bullet. So other than single-family residential, strong desire for mixed use. And I'm just trying to understand what mixed use would be in that context?
We talk about mixed use in two contexts. We talk about both horizontally and vertically and horizontally. So it can be first floor retail, second floor residential. It can also be two different uses on a lot. So it can be office, it can be residential in the back and office in the front, or commercial in front of the parcel. So in this context, I think we use mixed use as kind of both vertical and a horizontal perspective.
So, and that's why I asked the question. So conceivably, that could be residential, like townhouses or apartments, and retail, right? In a different building, but close by. Just conceptually.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I think what we took away from this is where we've seen some development is purely either townhomes or multifamily, single use only on a node, in a parcel in a node, and that did not score high at all. But if there is residential that's part of another use, that seemed to be more palatable.
Okay, understood.
And again, I want to be very clear with the survey. I try not to psychoanalyze the respondents to the survey. I don't know what their thoughts were when they were thinking this. I'm just reading the results of the survey and presenting those conclusions to you.
No, I understand. Thanks for the response.
Go ahead, Mr. Hudson.
That survey was impressive, and it seemed to, at least in my mind, the majority of the thoughts in that survey seemed to coincide with my thoughts as to development in Troy. In looking at the nodes, of those 6 nodes, 5, in my opinion, are pretty well built out right now. I mean, you've got tire stores and you've got fast food restaurants. None of them, in my opinion, seem to be amenable right now, at least, to multifamily or apartments or any kind of residential, except a concentration of more retail and opportunities for people to obtain services. The only one which I think is moldable and doable is the Crooks and Waddles. In my vision, and I think a couple others shared my vision with me on that when these nodes were discussed and finally placed, was that you would have a mixture of some retail or commercial which would be helpful or in aid to individuals in that neighborhood. And to put into that, let's talk specifics, the Crooks and the Waddles node, we've got plenty of housing in there now, and you've got a 7-Eleven and a dentist, and we got a corner that's literally dead with Whitechapel. So if we're going to do something with the node there, it's got to be something which is going to attract traffic to that intersection where you get the potential for some other residential use. Well, that's not the right word. I hate to use the word targets either, but institutions or places which a person in that area could walk to, like a drugstore, for instance, with miscellaneous things in there. I think we got too much jammed in there right now with the multifamily we've got. And I think this is our only opportunity, right now at least, to mold that intersection into what I envisioned we were talking about some years ago, a nice mixture of people living there, not necessarily single family, but living there with opportunities for retail to serve the community there. A core that you can walk to. The other nodes, I think if we're going to redesign any of those nodes with rezoning, you've got to take into consideration that you've got some institutions that have been there a long time. I don't envision at Rochester and Long Lake anybody ripping up that square with a shopping center, which seems to be in trouble every once in a while, taking that parking lot and destroying it and putting something else in there. I doubt anybody would want to live in that parking lot if it was reconstituted. So I think if we do this, we've got an opportunity to at least make one of these nodes what I had hoped would be and is not yet there. But I was impressed. We're certainly not going to have the city buy open space for people to use. We've got parks, and if someone wants open space, I think we're doing what we've been trying to do, is when we approve a site, that there's open space in this site for those residents in the area. But I think, I'm amazed at the survey. When I was in college, I took a statistics course, which I soon learned after 2 weeks I was over my head in water in that thing. But I did take away from it that that course is useful in setting a standard deviation so that you can take a survey and parcel it so that it may be representative of the whole community. We had 17 responses out of, 80,000 people in Troy, maybe excluding a bunch of children and this sort of thing. But I don't think we have to go that far. I think we got a good sense of what this community wanted, particularly among those who participated in the survey. And I would take it that if nobody wanted to participate in the survey, they may like to complain, but they don't want to do much more than that. And I would pay attention to what we were told with these 1,700 people.
Okay, Ms. Parakis.
Okay. I love that the survey sort of honed in on these 6 nodes, because I think that's going to help us move forward for sure. I would say that, Mr. Savedant, you talked about that Square Lake in Livernois and how you were surprised you didn't see it on there. The way I view that is it's a brand new development there. People just view it as that's a done deal. There's nothing to do with it more. They just built it. And so it also makes me think that the 5 nodes, excluding Waddles and Crooks, which is sort of undeveloped. The reason I would see people being concerned about those is because maybe they saw what happened at Maple and Coolidge, which I think is a total positive redevelopment of that strip mall. They moved things onto the corner. They beautified it. I mean, I wasn't involved in any of that, but it looks great. I thought they did a lot. So those other 5 nodes have some potential. Not all of them are like that, but some of them have potential to, like you were saying, all those strip malls have their life. They can be redesigned. So people might be wanting to voice their opinion that, okay, if you're going to come in here and redevelop this, do not put multifamily dwellings on there. I think that we need to really listen to the people saying no more multifamily dwellings. I think they're seeing these townhomes and apartments going up everywhere, and people are freaking out saying enough is enough. So I think that gives us some guide on how to approach those 5 nodes. As far as the Crooks and Waddles node goes, as you all know, that is my node in the sense that that's walkable from my house, so I'm very invested in that. I respectfully disagree with you, Mr. Hudson. To me, that I think there's the uproar about that node is that I don't even know if it should be in the nodes. When you look at the map of the nodes, to me, it's sort of an outlier. Maybe it should not even be a node that gets developed like the other nodes, because I don't know that that's an area that needs high traffic. I mean, the last thing I want is a CVS or a Rite Aid on that corner. To me, that is a more green space with, where the schools, there's 3 schools within half a mile from there. But I don't think tonight is the night to discuss what happens at Crooks and Waddles. But I did have to just say that I would not like to see an increase in traffic at that node. But I do think that tonight we can give some more direction about where we go, because I think there was enough to show us that there's 6 nodes that we should be focusing on, and I think we have an idea of what we don't want there, and I think that we have examples of how we've beautified some of those nodes, and which can serve to help make things more walkable and useful and attractive.
Go ahead, Mr. Roush.
I like the summary, and I like the survey. I think you guys did a good job of trying to focus those questions. As it relates to the mixed use, when I looked at that question myself, I kind of looked back to what the neighborhood noted had envisioned, which was similar in the sense that Mr. Hutchins was saying. It had a commercial component and another component. When wondering, you mentioned that you're going to go out and further interact with people from the nodes to try and get additional detail. I assume that's part of why trying to narrow it down to the 6, which I think is great. And I would wonder if at the same time, if you could confirm the belief that Ms. Parakis had, and I think I have as well, that a lot of people, when they looked at the development at the nodes as it relates to townhomes, looked at what happened at Square Lake and Livernois, although they didn't live there, or looked at those kinds of examples, and that's what they were thinking when it came to their own particular node that they were referring to. And I was hoping that when you do those interviews or interactions, you can nail down those questions. And I also ask, are we going to have the opportunity to participate in those as well?
So I was just my response, Mr. Rugg, good question. My response was, it's not that you, Ben and I are going to do it. We are going to do it. So we're going to agree on if it is in fact 6, which I think there was a pretty sharp drop off after 6. Like, it was clear that those are the 6. We would possibly look at actually meeting on site at those 6 nodes, walking them, inviting the public to come and participate, and all of us being involved in that interaction, that investigation. You know, we're all collectively going to be part of the deep dive.
And have you done that in the past, where you've?
Yeah.
And is it easy to be able to interact with the people and be able to get their questions if you have a large group show up?
We do this fairly often when we are in areas of, friction's not the right term, but of special concerned areas. We find it much more helpful to actually, we call it a walking tour, rather than sit in City Hall and design it, actually go on site. And especially here, because it's a pretty small geographic area, we're not talking about a corridor, we're talking about really an intersection. We can walk the whole entire node, and we have a program where we do it. We have specific questions we ask, and then we lead them through, you know, what do you like about it now? What do you not like about it now? What do you want to see changed? If it's changed, how would you like to see it changed? What are other examples in this community that you think would be appropriate here? So we lead them with some questions to kind of bring that out. And so, yes, we would love to have participation from the planning commissioners as we do these, what we would deem as walking tours. We'll just make sure there's no quorum, so we wouldn't have to.
Within the bounds of
the Open Meeting Act. So we have to be careful of that. But like I said, if we get direction that these are the 6 nodes we want to look at, we want to start publicizing dates when we're going to have these tours, so that the public is well aware of them. And maybe we'll have to talk to Director Salvador. We may do 2 tours of each node. I got to figure out dates and how we're going to do that. But it's more of an interaction than simply me sitting here telling you what it is. It's more of us asking questions and getting feedback from people that participate. And the other thing I want to note is to have interest in the node doesn't mean you have to live by it. It can be anybody can come to any node and give their voice and opinion. So,
thank you,
Ms. Malala Holly.
Couple observations. As I went about asking people or encouraging people to take the survey, this survey is a little bit objective and subjective in some ways. The subjective nature comes with the fact whether you live near that node. And Square Lake and Livernois, the closest node, the walkable distance node that I live at, has been a hot point of contention, and I agree with Mr. Savidant. It came as a surprise to me that people did not point out that part, because when the condominium complex was coming up, or the townhome complex was coming up, and later, and today, even to date, there are a lot of people who hate that thing that came up, and sitting so close to the road as well, and being a 2-lane road with hardly any traffic stops that does not permit continuous flow of traffic in that area. Over the past, Marshall Elementary, I think, has become a very congested place to go in or come out of. And I drive by that area, so I can attest to that fact. So that came as a surprise to me that people did not point that out. The second thing that came as a surprise to me is the Wattles and Livernois node. According to me, that is it's a very nice node, and it has a nice balance. I don't see any mixed-use development there, yes, but that is a nice node, and something that I did not feel was very congested, in my opinion, of course. But Long Lake and Livernois, I think that is, according to me, an ideal node. If somebody asked me what you would say as an ideal node or something that comes close to, is you have a Kroger, you have a pharmacy, you have a strip mall, you have a hardware store, which also is going to be very important for all of us, and then the neighborhood, that Sylvan Glen neighborhood that is right there, walkable distance to Kroger, and now the upcoming townhomes on Long Lake, just next to where Trevaro or Ace Hardware. I feel, personally speaking, and a Shell and a gas station there, Mobil or Shell, I don't remember. So I feel that we are attempting to get all the neighbors into that area to interact, to engage in commercial activity, and also walk up and to and fro from that node. So me personally speaking, Long Lake and Livernois, I feel is a very nicely spaced out area. But in regards to mixed use, I do want to point out that Denver is very big on mixed use development. I don't know how many of you have had a chance to see some very great projects that have come up in the in Denver area, where they are trying to attract the young, basically, and they are trying to do this mixed use development in terms of having the gym in the lower area and then the apartments on top. I know we don't want more, maybe people do not want to see more retail shopping there, I totally understand, but having something that does not involve a lot of crowd movement, yet allow mixed use to happen, would be a place for engagement too. I feel if you have a yoga class or if you have a art class in the downtown area, in the first floor area, like a studio, and have the apartments sit right on top, which is where most of the urban centers are moving toward, that would probably be something that mixed use will also, I mean, we will be able to answer our residents' thoughts on mixed use being one of the favorable ways of development. So.
Go ahead, Mr. Rahman.
Thank you. First, thank you, Mr. Savin and Mr. Carlisle. Wonderful job. Thank you, Ms. Malala Halit. Livernois and Long Lake is my node. And I completely agree with you. I can walk to, Kroger or CVS store or hardware store and get all my day-to-day stuff. And I interact with people, my neighbors. So that can be one standard that we can consider when we grow the other nodes. At least we have one. My question is to Mr. Savin and Mr. Carlisle. We are talking about 6 nodes. Do you think that survey results surprised you, that why people did not pick up that node or the other node? Are we missing anything? We have more than 6 nodes, right, altogether?
I guess I was a little surprised. I guess we were a little surprised at some of the nodes. I mean, there were 3 or 4 that we knew off the bat that were going to be a concern. I think there were others that we were a little surprised were included and some that were not included. I want to be also careful that we don't, like I said before, we don't have the ability to do all 19 nodes in the deep dive that we're going to do, these 600. That doesn't mean that the other 13 will be ignored. There will be review of them and there will be input opportunities for the other 13. The other thing I would say is that I think what we would do is we would utilize the principles we take from the 6 nodes and apply them to the other 13 as well. Just because it works at this intersection and some of the results doesn't mean that we can't apply the same principles to the other. So I'm not sure I answered your question.
No, you did. So the lessons learned can be a standard for the other nodes. That's basically what I like to make sure. Because 5 years down the road, we're not going to do anything on the master plan for the next 5 years. I'm just thinking, maybe we could. And then by then, every other nodes that we're talking about will be built out, and then they will go to the other places, and then we'll face the same problem. So I was thinking maybe we can, my question is, can we implement the same procedure, standard, or formula to the other nodes down the road?
Yeah, and I think we'll find some real strong commonalities between some of the both the concerns from these 6 nodes and also what the future development vision is for these 6 nodes. And I think we can apply those principles to the other 13 nodes are not part of this study. And then we can test that as we go through the input process moving forward. So we're not going to ignore the other 13. We just don't have the resources to focus on all 19 together.
And I have one follow-up question, if you allow me to ask that question. So the question is there any way we can enforce the distribution of different types of things instead of bringing all multi-family, condominium, or like as Mr. Malahali was saying, that maybe a grocery store, small, a hardware store, those kind of stuff? It's because,
I think it's tough I think it's impossible from a zoning perspective, and I think it's even harder from a market perspective. I don't think you can go and say, that needs to be a hardware store, but that needs to be a grocery store. I think you're...
But when we approve any residential, because we can go up to 3-story, right, for these nodes, or I don't exactly remember, right? 3-story, or that can we mandate that first story has to be commercial or something?
You can certainly, there are zoning ordinances that are written in districts that are written that require mixed use. That mixed use is a requirement as part of the use.
Right.
That can certainly be a part of discussion. We may get a little far ahead of us here in terms of that perspective at this point. But we want to be, the intent of these districts also, when they were established, that we use the term form-based. We cared less about the use per se and more about the building features, location, fenestration, pedestrian walkability. So there's a lot less focus on the use before. Sounds like we're getting more focused on the use as we move forward. So that's a little bit of change in mentality of how we've approached this in the past. But yes, we can be a little more prescriptive on the use. You can say no certain uses, and yes, you have to have these types of uses, but you can't get as prescriptive as you're talking about, where you're dictating what type of retail there is.
At least, it's an overall guideline that, hey, you have to have at least 2 of your ground floor level spaces retail stores. Just so that at least we have some capability.
So from a zoning perspective, you can require that. I've seen it done in other ordinances. The question is, from a market perspective, is there a market for that in Troy? I can't answer that now. I think we're a little ahead of ourselves there, but it's something that we would definitely look into if that's the interest of this commission.
Because I have experience from Portland, Oregon, and I have similar feedback, like the thing, first floor, and I have pictures also. I can share that with you later. Because I got really excited that we have all the apartments, and then the ground floor, people are having their, dinner, and it was very nice outside.
Love mixed use, huge proponent for mixed use, but there's other requirements to have that type of development. You have to have density. You have to have mass transit. There's a lot of developments that aren't necessarily in Troy right now, and I don't know that the direction especially from what we heard from the survey, people would be supportive to have that type of use, because you need that density with it. Like I said before, I think from a zoning perspective, some of your ideas are certainly doable. I think from a market, we need to really think about that if it's achievable.
Definitely market is for single family, the condos, right? We know that. And my feeling is that's why people are so conscious, and they gave feedback about those 6 nodes. Because our history shows that we had quite a few contentious discussions, about those nodes. That's why we got so much feedback. But we did not get too much feedback about other nodes, because those things were not discussed. But anyway, as long as I'm happy, as long as we apply the same formula on other nodes so that we can have some standards. Otherwise, it'll be too difficult to,
Go ahead, Mr. Salvador, you want to follow up on that?
You asked Ben and I if there were any surprises, and I mentioned my surprise was that the Square Lake and Livernois node wasn't higher up. That's really the only surprise. For the most part, I generally expected the same type of feedback. I would say that in 2008, when the city came up with this neighborhood node concept based on the input from the visioning, it was a paradigm shift. It was a significant paradigm shift. It was a new way of looking at these intersections that, for the most part, were gas stations and strip malls. It was looking at them differently, and that was 2008. We're now 2021. We're looking at these to see if they're still relevant. Has this concept been successful? Do we want to continue with it? If no, now's the chance. This is the policy document for land use and development moving forward. If Should we eliminate the concept? Should we rebrand it? I mean, I've been to meetings where people spit the term neighborhood node out. They don't, have we exhausted the use of the term neighborhood node? Do we need to think a little bit differently? Now's the time. Now's the time to put your stamp on it. One of the nodes that I, scratch my head at looking back, Node A in the southeast corner at 14 and DeQuinter. It was light industrial, and it's a node. It's surrounded by light industrial. Nothing's really happened there. So light industrial, it's IB, but that district allows a wide range of uses. Maybe that just needs to go away as a node and put it back to IB, which still encourages reinvestment and redevelopment. So, like Ben said, we're going to focus on the 6 for the deep dive, but we're not going to forget about the other ones.
That's good.
We're still going to provide analysis and seek your feedback. It's your document. We don't. It's not our doc. We don't vote. You vote. This is a document that you're going to recommend go before City Council for consideration. So now is your chance. If we didn't get the node right in 2008, and then when we amended it in 2016, now's your chance to get it right. So.
Mr. Faison, then Mr. Tagle.
Yeah, just a question, and building a little bit on Ms. Holly's point and Mr. Rahman's about mixed use in other communities. And I agree with you, and I remember we used to talk about that here, and there's a lot of complexity with mixed use development, financing them, building them, demand. But anyway, my point is we're talking about the nodes, and I think a lot of people are reacting to what they don't like, right? And I was wondering if we had examples, templates in similar communities, right, that may have gone through a similar process and developed, commercial corners, and have an example of something that might, quote unquote, work better than some of the nodes that people have issues with. Or we talk about Long Lake and Livernois and that working, and I agree with that, but it's not really form-based. Could we see an example of something like that so we have context, right, of what this could be, right, as opposed to each of us just kind of conceptualizing it individually? But again, I ask that because I think it's got to be a similar community, or I think it's best if it's a similar community. And I think these concepts of form-based districts and walkability and density in certain parts of the community are common, and other communities are striving for that. But, is there an example of where it works well that we can maybe look at as we look at the range of options?
Go ahead, Mr. Tagle.
Well, I think this is a really interesting discussion. I have a lot of comments, and I'm not going to share them all, but I think Brent has opened up something that I've been thinking about. Number one, 19 nodes in this community. There are corners that just are never going to get developed. We might as well just face the facts that this is not going to be part of whatever we call these corners, nodes or whatever we call them. The other thing too is I think we really have to think about what and how do we accomplish what we want to accomplish. I don't think it's quite as easy as, hey, having a walkable thing. This is a community. This is a whole metropolitan area that's based on automobile traffic. We're not just going to say, hey, we're going to create a walkable corner for you and people are going to, jump into that different lifestyle. So I think we have to look at realistically what can we accomplish in these nodes, and certainly raising the level of quality. I mean, I'm not suggesting that what we have on these corners are something we should strive for. I think we can improve upon that. The 6 nodes that are on here, I'd like to see us prioritize these because I think there's a couple of nodes here that, again, fall into that category. If there's anything that's going to be done, it's going to be done way, way down the road, far beyond, my tenure on this commission. But I look at these 6 nodes and I think to myself, 42% too intense, 36 just right. How do you reconcile that? I mean, what does that really mean? I mean, I don't know what it means, quite honestly. So I guess really we as a group need to look at these nodes and certainly engage with the public, but I think we have to have more discussion on what these things can be in the context of what we have here. You've mentioned it, Ben, a couple of times. We need some momentum, some volume to make this successful. I mean, we look at small downtown areas that are very vibrant, but it's because they're a destination place. We're not going to have 19 destination places in this city. It's too diluted. And they're not going to be destination places as I think we all like to envision in our heads, like, man, I'd like to spend a Friday night there or whatever it might be. So I think the whole concept needs to be maybe re-looked at. I mean, I think it was a great vision. How many years ago was that? It was very, very idealistic, but I think the reality of it is that we haven't made a lot of progress, number one. And the other part of developing these corners, who's going to do it? We've had nobody knocking our doors down and say, hey, we want to step in, partner with the city in the sense of getting on board with what your concepts are and develop something. So that's the other, and we've talked about this. Developers, it appears that there are developers that, depending on the geographic location, even from the west side of the state to the east, they look at these kinds of things totally different. And that's why you see different types of developments occurring in other areas that don't occur here. So, thank you.
Mr. Lambert.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to first mention, as Mr. Tagle said, there's a lot that I could comment on, but there were just three I wanted to focus in tonight. Before that, as a preface, great work on the survey to get that many people to respond is an excellent job by you guys and by staff and all the people that were involved in it. Going back to the whole visioning process, I was off City Council when the nodes were finally adopted, but I was involved in it when we did the visioning process. And I think at the time when the nodes were thought about as a vision, the idea was we weren't thinking in economics or marketing terms. We were thinking, well, if we create these nodes, maybe people will put little tiny neighborhood grocery stores so people can walk to them. Obviously, economically, it just doesn't work anymore, especially in a bedroom community like Troy. So I think obviously we need to go back to the drawing board and say, is that idea or vision of a node really work in a place like Troy anymore? Secondly, it's interesting that of the 6 ones that were at the highest priority, 4 of them are on Waddles Road, which is the first mile road just north of Big Beaver. So when we approach the nodes and how they work, especially on Waddles, is that an area where we need to concentrate and say this maybe needs to be more of a transition area rather than, you know, expecting important nodes to be along Waddles Road? I mean, that's the area that's facing a lot of pressure from development from Big Beaver, so we need to look at that and how can we manage the transition process better along Waddles Road. And I guess the last one was just, we've talked about some contradictions that come out of the survey, that people don't want to see more multifamily, but they want to see more empty nester homes. Mm-hmm. We've already seen in at least one project that these empty nester homes are pretty expensive for the average person who is in retirement years, unless they've got a big nest egg. So how do we meet that contradiction in terms between providing empty nester facilities or homes and at the same time say, but no more multifamily or no more condos? So I think that will have to be a struggle that we'll all have to work with together.
Mr. Roush, go ahead.
Two points. One was, can we get the details, the responses on the other nodes, even though they're not going to be the ones that we're necessarily focusing on? And secondly, kind of follow through on Mr. Tagle's comment, given that some of the nodes that in the 6 are almost fully developed, although they are the ones that had the most responses, they may give us opinions of the end result of the neighbors. Should we consider instead, do you want to focus on some of the undeveloped nodes that you think has the most benefit of being developed down the road?
There's no node that's not. I mean, there's no nodes that are just empty right now. So, I mean, every intersection in Troy has buildings on it, so there's no vacant nodes. I think what maybe you're asking is, what do we think are most likely to redevelop in the future?
The least, yeah. Are there of those nodes? I assume there's a few in there that are the least developed, that had the least responses. And that's what I'm speaking of.
Yeah, I don't-
Are any of those that you would want to,
I don't have an answer. I don't think we have an answer for that right now. That's something we could look, we can consider. But I don't know off the top of my head what those are at this point yet.
yeah, I don't either, not having it in front of me, otherwise I would offer an opinion, but. And
Yeah.
then getting the details on the other,
And the reason we chose those six was those six were 1, 2, and 3 in some order and clear far and away over any of the other nodes. So that's why we focused on those 6. It doesn't mean we have to. We just thought that was where the most interest was with regards to moving this forward. So if there, I think Director Saab and I will kind of collaborate and see if we think that we should swap out one or two of those with another node that may be more likely to develop it. We'll bring that back to this commission.
and getting the details on the other nodes?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, we can pull that. I'm not sure how long it would take, but we can get that for you. And I can get you all the raw data behind this too, so.
Whatever's easiest.
Yeah, we can provide some type of a, I haven't had time yet to kind of sit down and go over each one briefly but I think that's a discussion that we can have, not a deep dive, but more of a, 10,000 yard, what's here now, what's it used for, what's the zoning history of it, 'cause some study like that, there's a church, there's a property that's predominantly a church that, is that going to develop as a node? Probably not in the near future, but we can do that type of analysis.
Go ahead, Ms. Malala Holly.
Mr. Savidant, quick question. I liked how Mr. Tagle went on to say the 19 nodes, they're not going to develop equally. We know that, right? So when we go about asking questions from these 6 nodes that we have identified, is there a way for us to step out and even probably meet maybe another 2 nodes and talk to them to find out what they found to be lacking or what they are looking to see in the future? Can we do that? Extend it a little bit to identifying, maybe Mr. Carlisle can identify two more of those nodes that we think may be promising in the future in terms of development, but what kind of development are the neighbors
So
thinking?
as I understand your question, would it be appropriate to, instead of focusing on 6, focus on 8?
Or chop off 2 from those nodes, 2 of the 6 nodes, and then add in the other 2?
Yeah, I think it'll begin with an analysis that we'll do internally, and we'll bring it to the Planning Commission and with our findings and say, this is our reasoning.
Yeah.
What do you think? Because ultimately it'll be your decision. We'll defer to the Planning Commission on the direction based on our findings.
Sure, some kind of a balanced
Yeah.
approach that way, yeah.
Yep.
I would just say the same thing, is some kind of transparency of what was the criteria used to select, because you got the data, right? And I understand that majority people ask for that. But then again, that's from the present situation to, I think your point, right? You said that it's the pressure from the big waiver is causing these changes or these requirements. But then I'm looking like 10 years down the road, maybe it'll be, what is the next one next to Wattles? Long Lake, that will be my my road. It's the same thing, And there will be changes, right? A lot of new buildings will be constructed. A lot of old buildings will be demolished in Troy, for sure, because that's the trend, right? We didn't get the data yet about the population, which we're going to soon get it. And I think we're going to make our final decision after the census information, right? The national census. So we would have a better idea of the population, right? Is this growing or not?
Yeah, we can't advance a draft document until we have the census data.
Right. That's what we agreed. So that's why I'm saying, like, maybe you will find that we have a lot more people. And if that is the trend, then you can just extend the curve and you will find that, yes, there will be more people. So we have to think about those things when we design, or at least think about those nodes that we are not addressing. So 2 things. One is to kind of share briefly the criteria used, and maybe a picture of all the nodes, and these are the nodes that you are showing. That'll be a good PowerPoint slide. And then these are 2 things I would like to see, and I'm sure the public would like to see that as well.
We have an outstanding GIS system, Geographic Information System.
Right.
And the person who's responsible for that, his name is Alex Balak. He does an outstanding job. what Ben and I talked about was maybe for each of the nodes, and I haven't committed Alex to this yet, but he has a planning background and he really is into this stuff. But putting together a sheet with maybe showing this for each node, showing an aerial photograph, zoning, land use, recent developments, what it was zoned in the past, that type of information on one sheet for each of the nodes that I think would provide a very interesting snapshot in terms of, where it is now and how it got there. And then that would be the kind of the playbook that we would base our kind of our general analysis on, and then make a determination of which ones to focus on based on the survey results, based on that general analysis, and based on your feedback. Ultimately, you as a board will decide that.
Thank you.
I love the thinking.
Okay. I've got a few thoughts. One big one is thank you for an excellent survey and a way of presenting it to us, so it's very easy to understand. So thanks for that. Second, when I looked at the results of the survey, I'm going to focus on Crooks and Waddles since it was highly contentious, and it shows 2 intents, 42%, just right, 36%. Now, if I was a person taking that survey and wasn't on the planning commission, I just came, I looked at that intersection and said, well, there's a big vacant lot on the northeast. That's, Whitechapel. There's a big vacant lot on the northwest. That's just right. I like it empty. and the other one's a house. Well, that's just right on the corner. That's the southwest. And there's this terribly congested 7-Eleven that people come out of there and just, it's like a panic to either get in or get out. But, 3 out of the 4 corners look pretty darn good. So I'm going to say it's just right. So how do you, and then we get the, people that live in that area say, oh my God, this idea of row housing next to our single family homes is just an absolute no-go. So, I'm trying to put that, the survey thoughts into what we've experienced in real life. And at this point, two things come to mind. One, we should totally examine if we want any housing at neighborhood nodes at all. And the reason I say that is these intersections are already the most congested traffic-wise, and we see that 7-Eleven in situation. Do we want to put in more housing in those corners? Now, personally, I don't think so. Especially not row housing, not high-density housing in an already congested traffic area. So, and then you look at the results on the survey, and literally, I can't remember the percentage, but very few people wanted row housing or apartments at those neighborhood nodes. So I think that's a strong indicator of we shouldn't do it. Just wipe it right out of the neighborhood node concept. And as far as retitling or rebranding the neighborhood nodes, that's fine. But my overall opinion is they were meant to be a place for the existing residents to maybe walk to or bike to, or have their kids get a loaf of bread or pick up something, for dinner tonight, and not to add in housing in those corners. So that's my feeling and my thoughts. Again, like I said, I appreciate all the work you did. Any other thoughts from our commission? I think you got direction.
I did, and I want to make sure that I'm not taking credit where credit was due. The heavy lifting for the survey was done by Ben and Megan Masson-Minnick from Carlisle Wortman Associates. I helped, but again, they did the heavy lifting. And shout out to IT, who was really, really helpful throughout this, and Stephanie Fleischer and Cindy Stewart from the City Manager's Office, who were very helpful in getting the word out and providing us with some of those platforms that we used. So thank you to them.
Sure, thank you. All right, we go on to our next item, since there's no other thoughts on this right now. Next item is, application to delist the 6071 Livernois. Is that?
That's me, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
We have a historic preservation ordinance. It's Chapter 13 of our Code of Ordinances. It was created in the very early 1980s. we have numerous, probably 40 to 50 properties that are listed as historic districts, and each individual property is an actual historic district. So there's a process when a property is listed as historic. Has to meet certain requirements. For example, any renovations have to be done in historic character of the structure. It can't be demolished if it's historic. It has to be delisted. So we have an application to delist 6071 Livernois. Most of you probably know it as Ye Old Flower Barn. And the application was submitted, unfortunately, during the pandemic. And this is probably I did my master's thesis on historic preservation. I'm into historic preservation. I'm not into the cumbersome nature of the delisting process. It is not fun. It is stressful, and it is time consuming. Let me give you a very quick rundown. There's a committee that's called the Historic District Study Committee. That is an ad hoc committee. It is only formed when there's an application to delist, so it is not a standing committee. So we get an application to delist. I have to inform the city manager, who informs the city council. Then they have to find 3 volunteers who are willing to serve on the committee. Then they have to announce, they have to nominate at one city council meeting, appoint at the next city council meeting. Then that gives me the go-ahead to start to do the report. We don't have funding to hire anybody to do the report, so it falls on me, and I utilize people I can to help me do that. Then we put together a preliminary report. We have a meeting of the Historic District Study Committee. They say yes or no. They make a recommendation. Then we have to send the preliminary report to City Council, and when that happens, everything goes on hold for 60 days. We have to send the report to the State Historic Preservation Office for their feedback. The State Historic Preservation Office is supposed to get back with us in 30 days. It was closer to about 100 days, is that right? I had to give them a bump to remind them, so I got that feedback in late June. Then we have to inform the Planning Commission and have another meeting of the Historic District Study Committee. They make a recommendation, and it goes to City Council. So it's a very lengthy, I have a headache just explaining the process. So here we are. The report is required to be transmitted to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission can make a recommendation. They cannot make a recommendation. It's up to the Planning Commission. It's a non-binding recommendation. So just to give you a very, to also add to my frustration, the State Historic Preservation Office has never supported a delisting. They think that every historic building should remain forever. So this house, it's a house and barn. The entire property is considered historic. The house was built around the 1900. It was renovated in the late 1960s, shortly after the Jezierski family purchased it, and they created the Ye Old Flower Barn. It's of a typical style of the era. While there are very few surviving homes from that era in Troy, there doesn't seem to be any reason for historic designation. You can see in the research we researched every property owner in its history. Now, what's really frustrating with this application, you're sensing a theme of frustration here. The files for all the historic properties are in the planning department, and this property does not have a file attached to it, nor was there a file at the state. So I have no idea why it was considered historic in the first place. So we have to kind of spitball and try to make a logical determination. And we were unable to do that. I'm not going to go through the history of it, but I don't know why it was deemed to be historic, other than the fact that it was built in around 1900. We reached out to a member of the Michigan Barn Preservation Network. They're experts on historic barns. They believe the barn does not have historic value. So it's unclear why it was designated historic. Now you go to you look at the feedback from the state. The state says that the house is a representative example of late 19th century cross-gabled Victorian farmhouse. It has a clipped roof that, though not rare, is uncommon, which I don't know the difference between rare and uncommon. I'll have to figure that one out. It's uncommon on a vernacular house of this style in Michigan. The property still appears to retain most of the physical characteristics that originally defined it. The report does not make the case that the house is no longer historically significant. Of course, we can't make a strong case because we don't know the reason that it was determined to be historically significant in the first place. The report from the state says that our report should include a more detailed list of changes to the property, the approximate period they occurred, and an analysis of how the changes affected its historic integrity. I can't do that because I don't know why it was determined to be historically integral to begin with. So their recommendation is that the study committee research the history of Troy Corners to determine the significance of the property. We've done that. There's a lengthy description of the ownership and the history of this property. It does go on to say that the relationship of this property to Troy's founder, Johnson Niles, former Michigan State Senator, who died in 1872, should be further researched. He died in 1872. The house was built in 1905. So he died 33 years before the house was built. Fairly confident he never lived in the house. I'm just guessing.
Good guess.
So the State Historic District Commission recommended that the home be delisted. We are supporting that recommendation. Again, the Planning Commission can pass a resolution recommending delisting, or you can take no action or whatever you see fit, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks.
I defer to you.
Yeah.
One of the owners is here and a representative of the family is here.
Okay. I'd like to hear from the homeowners and any other representatives before we have a discussion. I think it would add to our thought process if you would come up and tell us your thoughts.
Thank you. Good evening. Welcome back. My name is Jeff Jezierski, and I'm the firstborn of Fred and Janine Jezierski, who purchased the home and barn and remodeled it into a living residence for 5 children and a business, the Old Flower Barn. And I think the business was open for 47 years. They were residents and citizens of Troy for 50. And unfortunately, the business had to close because of COVID and economic shutdown last April. And in August, we sold the inventory and had a closing sale. At that time, we decided as a family to put Mom in a condominium and give her a good life for the end of her days, and little did we know she would get pneumonia in December of 2020 from COVID, and she would die in December, living in the condo for a month. So we had 6071 to deal with selling that, and we had the condo at the same time living to deal with that. Back to the delisting, we just felt like it was a very big hardship on my mom for sure, and just paying the bills and utilities for 2 buildings, et cetera, all the expenses there. Plus, when Dad got the vision, to build the screened-in porch, he turned it into a kitchen. It didn't really change the structure per se, but it did close in the screened-in porch into a kitchen, which was a huge change. And then later on, I think it might have been the early 70s, or maybe later, he decided to put a 2-story silo for closet space in the lower and upper bedroom. There was a 15 by 22 story addition put on the barn for designing and inventory, which pretty much extended the structure of the barn. And to me, it totally changed the configuration of the original structure. So through all that, I'm just asking that the Planning Commission would give us favor and delist this historical property and open it up to investors or people that would like to develop the property and not be limited to sell it to a small business residential situation, which at this time is not very encouraging for a small business to have another startup and totally go through bringing it up to fire code, all that kind of expense. after 50 years of being grandfathered in without all of those extreme measures to have a business. So thank you for hearing me, and I hope we will, like I said, find favor. And I have a friend here that has been helping us in the real estate process, and he probably might be able to add a few things to my comments.
Good evening. My name is...
Yes, sign in too.
Sure. My name is Lee Johnson, and I am a former resident of Troy and graduate of Troy High School and former employee of the Flower Barn. So for perspective, I thought it was pretty cool, actually. I got paid to drive around and deliver flowers, and that's actually how I did my book reports, because I could actually listen to my books I had to read for my AP English classes while driving. If you guys remember that kind of 70s looking van that had the scrolling writing. But yeah, so I've known the Jezierski family for quite a number of years, and Janine was certainly like family to me, and the situation that we're in it's hard, it's rough. The whole point of the Chapter 13 obviously was to want to protect the properties that are historically significant. And as you've heard, there is no historical significance here, but I think the bigger hardship that you're not hearing right now is the full hardship capacity that Chapter 13 places on the properties. For example, let's say somebody does want to purchase the property to live in it. Let's say somebody says, I want to be a florist. I want to open up a flower shop here too. I want to keep this a place where the neighbors can walk down and come get flowers and go back to their home. But I want to change the color. Did you know they can't? They have to get approval first from the Historical Commission, as appointed by the City Council. But before we could get an application even to delist, we had to get that from the Commission. But the Commission wasn't in existence. Do you know why? There weren't enough people for the board, because people weren't wanting to serve on boards, because we had a pandemic. And so when you think about breaking down every single aspect to that, you're talking about you can't even use a family home or an accessory structure or put up a fence or paint a gutter or anything of that nature, things that we take for granted in our everyday homes, simply because it has an ordinance protecting it because of something that was done back in 2002, which, from my understanding, was actually at the time I worked at the barn, that was if you were written on this list and deemed that you were historic at the time, you had 60 days to answer, and if you didn't, you were on the list. Now, I don't know about many of you. There's been a lot of terms that have been thrown out here about zoning terms and how these things work and what is this and what is that. But if I put myself in the homeowner situation back then, I wouldn't have known what that meant. I don't know if I would have responded if I were of that age, trying to run a business, living in that house, and everything else that may have been going on at the time. So here we are today. And what you have in front of you is absolutely correct from Brent. You have no commitment to act. You have nothing that is binding, but what you do have is an ability to make a recommendation. And that is what the family, and that is what, as a strong friend of the family, is asking of you today. A recommendation to City Council to please delist this property. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Mr.
Can I just piggyback on something that Mr. Jezierski said? He gave a fairly lengthy list of renovations to the building that he felt compromised the historic integrity of the building. Those are all made before the property was listed.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
Again, getting back to the reasons for the listing, I'm unclear.
Yep. Any comments from our commissioners to the owners of the owner and the owner's friend of the building? Seeing none, my only thought is I would be in favor of delisting. I don't know what how the rest of the commission feels, but I bought flowers at this store. Nice, great environment to shop. I just enjoyed the time there. But yeah, I could see your predicament, and I would, certainly agree with you to have it delisted because, truthfully, we don't really understand its historical value in any kind of record form, other than what was wonderfully provided by our planning director. I mean, I read the full report, and it was very interesting, but it didn't really give me any reason to keep it listed as a historical building and value. So any other thoughts? Go ahead, Mr. Roush.
Mr. Savinand, is there benefit of us making a resolution or saying we're in favor of delisting? Benefit of the study?
Yeah, I think there is. I think the city council does respect the planning commission and does put a significant weight on recommendations of the planning commission. So it sounded like, Mr. Chairman, not to put words in your mouth, that you were leaning towards making a motion.
Yes. But I just wanted to hear from Commission. Go ahead, Ms. Barakis.
I do have I have two comments. One is a question, actually. The question is there any benefit to being listed as a historical,
No.
being listed as a, do you get payment, do you get?
Tax breaks, there is nothing else that are incentives from the city of Troy for being listed. No plaques, nothing else.
I think in the early 80s when this program was put together, I think there was more tax benefits and there was more grants, et cetera, available. But I agree with Lee, those have dried up, to the best of my knowledge.
Okay, but over time, there might have been some tax benefits received by being listed.
Perhaps, but this was put on to Chapter 13 in 2002, and since 2002 until now, through our research, there's been no benefits that I'm aware of.
Okay, and then one other thing that I had read on page, it's on page 99 of our agenda, but it says, Lorraine Campbell and Jen Peters did a visual inspection of the barn on August 17th, 2020. There is some age to it with hard-hewn beams, original rafters that still have bark, and some original floors, but it's been heavily modified. It would need further review by a barn specialist to determine what kind of historical value it may still have. So is there a reason we're not having a barn specialist look at it, or have we done that?
We have, yes.
If you read further, there was a representative of the Michigan Historic Barn Network that visited the building and made a determination that his opinion and the opinion of an architect that he brought with him was not historically significant.
Okay, so the ones who disagree are the state of Michigan, who said that there's not enough information.
Correct.
Okay. And is there somebody here also, I don't know if they're here to speak. Is anyone else here to speak about it in the audience? No?
I don't see anybody. Go ahead, Mr.
Quick question. That property, anything next to that property, it's also considered historic? Because I don't remember, because I know I go around that area quite a bit.
Yes, there was. Right next to it, it used to be referred to as the White property. There was a house there, but it was actually demolished a number of years ago. It was delisted.
It was delisted.
It was
Okay,
delisted.
so there is a trend that, some of these properties were listed.
Having mold in the basement. The reason I know that is because at the time that I worked at the Flower Barn in 2002, I had friends that also attended Troy High that used to rent the property. It was owned by Uncle Luke's Feed Store. The garage was still built in the back of the structure. It's behind the plaza itself, where Subway and where Franklin Covey used to be. And the garage itself was also then torn down some years ago as well, so it's completely vacant.
Okay, so there is a trend.
There's a trend, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Mr.
Go ahead, Mr. Lambert.
Just a procedural question. If we were to consider a resolution on this, Ms. Dufresne, would we need to officially open a public hearing on this or not?
No, it's not required.
All right.
Ms. Malala Holly.
Just a quick question. Any part of the house or barn that has significant historical value, like for example beams, can those be preserved and kept in our Troy Historic Village so that we have all these
They've
elements
already
preserved?
been contacted and brought out to the property, and they have nothing of any significance that they wanted for the village.
Oh, I see. Okay, got it. Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Go ahead, Mr. Tagle.
I just want to say, it sounds like you've done your homework. I appreciate you have answers to all of the questions. And,
Well, thank you, I appreciate that.
I think the big thing for me is that if the city and the state don't have records indicating why this was ever considered a historic property, to me, I mean, it's really not then.
Anyone like to come up with a resolution? Mr. Lambert.
I would move that we recommend the delisting of the property that used to be known as the Ye Old Flower Shop.
Or
Flower Barn, sorry.
Okay, any discussion on the resolution? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Chair, I did not catch who supported it.
Oh, yeah,
I support that.
You looking for the second?
yeah, it was, Mr. Hudson, we'll give it to Mr. Hudson.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Parakis,
Yes.
Mr. Rahman,
Yes.
Mr. Roush,
Yes.
Mr. Tegel,
Yes.
Mr. Faison,
Yes.
Mr. Hudson, Mr. Krant,
Yes,
Mr. Lambert,
Yes.
Ms. Malahali.
Yes.
Motion carries.
thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming in tonight. Appreciate your time.
Just for the record, the next step is a meeting of the Historic District Study Committee for the final report, then we go as a city council for approval. The finish line is within sight now.
Again, very much, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you for your.
You're certainly welcome.
report. Well done.
And Brent, just to clarify, that will be a public hearing at the historic.
The Historic District Study Committee will be a public hearing.
Will come in.
Very good. Next item on the agenda is public comments for items on the current agenda. Is there anyone in the audience, or do we have any emails or other communications regarding public comments for items on the current agenda? Oh, yeah.
No.
What about this?
Yeah, I was going to mention that during public comment, or during planning commission comment.
Okay, fine, that's fine. So we'll go on to the next item is planning commission comments and staff comments.
Yeah,
We'll start with Mr. Sabato.
Okay, those of you who watched City Council last night, the Lindsay Center rezoning was approved by City Council unanimously, and the Euclid pathway vacation was also approved by City Council. Speaking of the Lindsay Center, I got an email from Jordan Jonah, who's the applicant for the Lindsay Center, and he pointed out something that's kind of I think potentially something challenging in our zoning ordinance related to the Big Beaver zoning district. I think with, and we can get more into this at a later date, but I just wanted to kind of get some direction from the Planning Commission. With COVID and with expiring office leases and the impact it had on the hotel industry, I've read places that we can expect maybe some vacancies in some of these offices and hotel uses, and we can perhaps we can expect some repurposing of some of these buildings into maybe condominiums or apartments in the Big Beaver district, some of these high-rise buildings. And the Big Beaver district does allow residential development, but it does not allow any residential on the first floor, which we've talked about mixed use, and we do want mixed use on the first floor when it relates to the street. We don't necessarily want to have apartments that on the first floor at ground level, but perhaps having residential units on the first floor that in areas of the building that don't relate to the street, or in buildings that are behind the building that fronts on Big Beaver, isn't as much of an issue. And his suggestion is amending the footnote in table 5.04C1 that prohibits residential on the first floor, to amend it to allow it on the first floor, basically as long as transparency requirements are met and there's not a loss of design. So as long as the building still has that relationship, that walkability, and that relationship with the street. So that's I think they're looking for flexibility, not only for this property but for other properties, and they're requesting the Planning Commission to consider an amendment that would allow more flexibility on the first floor for residential buildings.
Go ahead, Mr. Tegel.
When you say residential, are you talking about living quarters on the first floor?
Yes.
Yeah, I would really like to talk about that, because I think there are a lot of common area uses that can be put on the first floor, whether it's exercise rooms or business offices, for the residents, or things like that.
Swimming pools.
Well, anything other than living quarters per se, common areas that could serve the residents in the building. So I think I'd like to really have a little more discussion on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts? Ms. Malala?
So this is where I was talking about the mixed use. I understand Denver is a very urban area that I used as an example earlier, but in some of the suburban communities too, you will see that mixed use is being very efficiently used where they're using the lower floor as a hangout area, as a neighborhood gathering space. I hate to lose that for the Big Beaver corridor. I'm honestly that we can really make use of that first floor as an art studio, as a class for children to attend or whatever. I mean, there are many ways that people can become very creative with that space and still have the upper floors address the needs of the residents and use that as a gathering space. So I, personally speaking, would want more discussion on this and to reconsider how we envision for Troy, especially the Big Beaver corridor, where we can attract a lot of young crowd. We want that happening. We want that to be the happening place. So I would definitely reconsider.
Go ahead, Mr. Roush.
I think that I agree with the comments that I've heard, but I want to point out that the office buildings, as it is, prior to COVID, had a very hard time supporting other commercial uses in the buildings. Not all the office buildings could get a small shop or a restaurant and get enough business to be able to support them, and in most instances had to subsidize those businesses in some fashion. So it definitely is an issue. It's a definite issue. If you take a building like that Mr. Jonah had, I believe that was that 6 stories? Roughly
Yes.
40,000 square feet. So he's got 6,000 square feet on that floor that he's going to have to put to use. And I think your ideas are the best, but I think we need to keep in mind that there may be more that has to be done.
Go ahead, Ms. Parakis.
I just have a question for you. Basically, is it something that we have to amend, or is it something that we can permit on a case-by-case basis? If they came to us and proposed a plan, would we be allowed to allow them to deviate from the ordinance in that specific place, as opposed to just amending the zoning ordinance and then being stuck having to allow it for anybody?
So as written, it's prohibited. It's clearly prohibited on the first floor.
Okay.
So I think what Mr. Jones is looking for is the case-by-case basis where we make a determination on a case-by-case basis if it's appropriate. And you know, we've talked about it, and in the email, like the intent is not to affect the Big Beaver corridor you don't want to be walking down the sidewalk and looking at someone's apartment.
Right.
That's not the intent. The intent is inappropriate areas on the first floor on a case-by-case basis. So.
He gave I mean, I'm just glancing at it, but provided transparency requirements are met, then we get someone in here and they say, well, we met the transparency requirements, and then we're forced to approve it. I'd rather see something more like, but the planning commission or whoever has discretion to decide, complete discretion, and we do it on a case-by-case basis. Not that they have to meet criteria.
And I want to state, I think we all want the same thing. In a perfect world, we want vertical mixed use. We all agree that's the best thing. I think what they're looking for is flexibility. They want to incorporate vertical mixed use in appropriate areas where it's going to achieve the goals of mixed use, but where it doesn't make as much sense, like Mr. Rauch indicated, maybe behind the building where you can't see it from Big Beaver, or in the second building where you can't see it. So if this is something you want to discuss further, we certainly can. I told him I would present it this evening and see where it went.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
My take is like we should not allow people to deviate from Big Beaver ordinance, which is, so period. Because otherwise, because the residential property is pretty expensive and pretty lucrative here, right? So there is an ordinance we put together for certain reasons, and why would we want to change that? Because of the business reason or because of certain change in the office versus home working, we make an amendment. We are allowing people to repurpose the building, right? That's something we have done, but for that we cannot just say that no, every floor has to be residential. I don't think that's too much. That's my take. Thank you.
Any other thoughts? My quick thought is, in the Big Beaver district, we have an Amber Apartments that has living quarters on the first floor. Yikes, we already have it. already exists?
That's conditional rezoning.
Conditional rezoning.
Was that conditional
It's not
rezoning?
maybe, it's conditional,
Okay.
different.
It's, no, it's not, it was conditional, but it's a different street type. It's street type C. It's a different street type than Crooks and Big Beaver, which is street type A.
So what are we going to do, guys?
It sounds like something we should end up discussing.
Okay. Mr. Tagle wants to give more discussion to it, and looks like a lot of nodding heads for that, so.
Yeah, we can put together some information.
Okay,
have
that
another
sounds good.
More informed discussion. I kind of hit you blind with this by handing it out tonight.
We can handle it.
Twice tonight, Brent. Blind information.
All right, so I'm going to start with Ms. Malala Holly, just go right down any comment from the
None, thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Broush, and just continue on down.
I'd like to add Section 5.06E1A to our agenda for our next meeting.
Do you think they'll be ready?
I'm talking about which is the issue that we had, I brought up, over a month ago, and it had been tabled. I'd like to put it back on the agenda for our next meeting.
Okay.
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. Rahman.
I have a question which is completely, different than what we've been talking. I like to see bike lanes on streets. So who makes the decision? Because I see the cities around us, they have bike lanes. So Mr. Savidan, you want to answer that question? Do you know how to get that?
Who makes the decision?
Or how can we have the bike lanes in our Troy streets?
It's a decision involving our policymakers, city council, and trickling all the way down to including the city engineer, the Department of Public Works, et cetera. I think it's a more involved answer than I'm really prepared to get into the details of.
So do you think that we can have that discussion in planning or some other places? So is it like in the city council, maybe I should go and ask that question, or we can just discuss it here and take it to the next level?
I think either works. As a resident, you could communicate to city council, let your thoughts be shared, or you could by resolution you could ask as a planning commission, ask the city council to look into it. What I can do is I can see what memos or what information that's readily available that I can share with the planning commission.
Yeah, maybe we can have another discussion in the comment section. You can just share that, and then we can make a resolution. I will make a motion because I really like to see safe biking, in Troy, because sometimes it's dangerous. I see, because the guy is riding bike next to my vehicle, and sometimes he may, my detector may not notice it, right? Thank you, Mr. Savidan.
Good, Mr. Lambert.
First, apologize, it will not be at the joint training session with City Council on the 24th. I already had a pre-existing plan, so I'm sorry I won't be at that, but I'll be looking forward to watching the video. I think they said last night or at the previous council meeting that they were going to videotape it, so I'll watch that. Secondly, Mr. Savidan would share with Mr. Bovenseep the results of the survey, especially the parts that have to do with green space, because I know Mr. Bovenseep was the liaison with the city's Green Space Advisory Committee, which made a recommendation about some possible ballot language for a millage to secure the purchase of more green space in Troy. So that's it.
Nothing. I've got nothing. Go ahead.
Nothing from me. I'm good, thank you.
Ms. Dufresne.
Nothing, thank you.
Yep. All right, then this is adjourned.